Please like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel. 7 Deadliest Diseases in History. 1. The Black Death. Bubonic Plague. The Black Death ravaged most of Europe and the Mediterranean from 1346 until 1353. Over 50 million people died, more than 60% of Europe's entire population at the time. Many historians believe it started in the steppes of Central Asia. A vast area of grassland that even today still supports one of the world's biggest plague reservoirs, an area where rodents live in great numbers and density. Plague is mainly spread through the bite of a flea infected with the plague-causing bacterium, Yersinia pestis. Fleas typically live on small animals such as rats, gerbils, marmots and squirrels, and periodically, explosive outbreaks of plague occur among these susceptible hosts. Huge numbers of animals succumb to infection and die. Hungry fleas turn to humans, and within 3 to 5 days of a bite, fever, headache, chills, and weakness develop. Lymph nodes closest to the bite site swell to form a painful bubo in the variant of plague known as bubonic plague. Infection may spread throughout the bloodstream and affect respiration in the lungs. Without prompt antibiotic treatment, 30% to 100% of infected people die. 2. The Speckled Monster. Smallpox. The origins of smallpox have been lost in prehistory, but research suggests it first appeared around 10,000 BC. Telltale pockmarks adorn the mummified remains of the great Egyptian pharaoh Ramses V, dated at 1156 BC, and the disease is described in ancient Sanskrit texts. Smallpox is caused by the variola virus. Humans are the only natural hosts of smallpox, and transmission depends upon direct contact with an infected person or infected bodily fluids, contaminated bedding or clothing. Airborne transmission is rare, although is more likely in enclosed settings such as buildings, buses, and trains. An incubation period of up to 17 days, average 12 to 14 days, follows exposure to the virus, and people are not contagious at this time. Initial symptoms are generally flu-like before small spots start to develop inside the mouth and on the tongue. Within 24 hours a rash starts on the face and quickly spreads before evolving into raised volcano-like pustules filled with a thick, opaque fluid. These pustules may take up to 2 weeks to scab over, leaving marks on the skin that eventually become pitted scars. Yearly death rate in the 1800s was 400,000 from smallpox. During the 18th century, over 400,000 people died annually in Europe from smallpox. Overall fatality rates were around 30%. However, rates were much higher in infants, 80 to 98%, and 1/3 of all survivors went blind. 3. Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, SARS. The history of SARS was short but not so sweet. SARS generated widespread panic in 2003 and was caused by a previously unknown coronavirus, the same family of viruses that causes COVID-19. Symptoms of SARS began 2 to 10 days after coming into contact with the virus and included a high fever, headache, body aches, sometimes diarrhea. But the main symptom of concern was the severe breathing difficulties associated with SARS, and almost all those infected developed pneumonia. By the end of 2003, 774 people had died out of the 8,098 infected people notified to WHO. Many more people needed to be hospitalized for breathing assistance. SARS is spread through close contact with infectious droplets released during a cough or sneeze. SARS started in Asia, and researchers have identified the most likely source as wild Chinese horseshoe bats that had been caught and brought to market. These bats harbored a SARS-like virus that subsequently infected civets before mutating, which meant that humans were now susceptible to the virus. Within a year, the infection had spread to more than 24 countries before it was contained through public health measures. 4. Avian Influenza. Not just one for the birds. Just like humans, birds get the flu. Bird flu, also called avian influenza, is common, and several major outbreaks have occurred sporadically worldwide since the disease was first recorded in Italy in 1878. It took until 1955 to discover that the virus causing bird flu was an influenza type of virus. Avian influenza occurs naturally among wild aquatic birds and can easily spread to more susceptible farmed poultry, millions of chickens. Geese and turkeys were destroyed to prevent further spread of the disease following the outbreaks that occurred in 2015 and 2016. Globally, there have been 864 cases of human infection within this time period, with a case fatality rate of 53%. The latest case was reported from US in April 2022. The H7N9 and H5N1 of avian influenza are the most likely strains to infect humans, although other strains have caused small outbreaks. H7N9 is considered the influenza virus with the greatest potential public health impact. 5. Ebola. On the radar again. Ebola is a severe, often fatal disease. Death rates average 50%, range 25 to 90%, caused by the Ebola filovirus. There are 5 different types of Ebola virus, 4 of which are known to cause disease in humans. Ebola was first discovered in 1976 and bats are thought to be the most likely reservoir, natural permanent host, of the virus. The virus readily spreads to humans, and from human to human. Direct contact, through broken skin or mucous membranes, with an infected person or animal, either living or dead, or with objects such as contaminated needles and syringes is the most common way Ebola is spread. Cases of sexual transmission from people who have survived the virus have also been reported, months after their recovery. Symptoms may appear from 2 to 21 days, average 8 to 10 days, after exposure to the virus and include fever, severe headache, muscle pain and weakness, diarrhea, vomiting, bleeding and bruising, and death. Survivors develop antibodies that protect them from further infection for at least 10 years. The most significant outbreak of Ebola in recorded history occurred from 2014 to 2016, predominantly in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. 6. Leprosy. A feared disease that features in the Old Testament. Leprosy is an infection caused by the slow-growing bacterium, Mycobacterium lepraeus. It has a long incubation period, 2 to 5 years, range 6 months to 40 years, and symptoms usually start as a numbness or loss of feeling in a defined area of skin, reflecting the affinity of the bacterium for nerve cells. Despite not being very contagious, leprosy has been feared and misunderstood throughout its history. Initially thought to be a curse or a punishment from God, leprosy sufferers were stigmatized, forced to wear special clothing or ring bells to warn others when they were approaching. Symptoms vary from person to person, and tend to progress with time, ranging from mild, indeterminate hypopigmented skin lesions to blindness, deformity and severe facial disfigurement. 7. Polio. The most dreaded childhood disease of the 1940 to 50s. Polio is a crippling infectious disease that is often fatal. Children under the age of 5 are especially susceptible. Although periodic epidemics occurred during the late 19th century, it was the spike in prevalence that occurred in the 1940s and early 1950s that triggered the start of the worldwide campaign of polio vaccination. Polio is caused by the very contagious and resilient poliovirus and spreads from person to person, most commonly through contact with infected feces. Feces can remain infectious for several weeks, as can food, water, or objects contaminated by feces. Approximately 72% of people who catch polio show no symptoms. 25% develop flu-like symptoms, for example, sore throat, fever, tiredness, headache, nausea, abdominal pain, within a week or 2 after infection. A small proportion of these people will go on to develop more severe symptoms such as paresthesia, burning or prickling limb pain, meningitis, infection of brain and spinal cord, limb weakness, and paralysis that may lead to permanent disability and death if the respiratory muscles are affected.